Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As usual, I'll be giving just a minute to allow most of you guys to come in before we start the business of the day. How have you guys been? How is the weather treating each and every one of you? Hope things are moving on smoothly. Monday in Philly was hot. Tuesday was kind of favorable, but today we are back to cold. Those on break, how is your break going on? Those in the office, working, hope everything is moving on smoothly. And of course, those working remotely, like some of us here, hope it's been fun. Today is a good day. Just give us a minute and we'll keep it up. Good. Like I said 1 minute ago, again, I will just take it up from here, even as more people keep joining us for the event. Good afternoon once again and welcome. For those of you guys that are joining us for the first time, my name is Garba Esahaya, and I'm a training coordinator with the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple Small Business Development Center helps small business start and grow. We offer free one-on-one consulting and a variety of low to no-cost webinars. We are proud to be part of the nationally accredited network of the Small Business Development Centers, which has over 1,000 networks across the United States. You are here this afternoon for a webinar on international e-commerce, expanding your market online. A copy of the PowerPoint and the link to the recording will be sent to all the attendees. Being a webinar, all the attendees have been muted. However, we always encourage you guys to drop your questions on the Q&A or the chat box. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome my wonderful speakers, even as they take over the floor for the presentation. Janice and Blondie, you guys are welcome.
Well, thank you, Garba. So today, as Garba had said, we're talking about international e-commerce, expanding your market. And I'm very honored to have my colleague Blondine with me today. So Blondine is going to kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Garba. So quickly about myself, I have a little accent. I'm a French immigrant. I have 15 plus years of experience in international markets, mostly transatlantic and Canada and the US. I'm also Growth Wheel certified, so it's some tools that can be helpful to you when you start planning your export strategy. And I'm also part NASBITE certified, so certified global business professional. Next slide. And I think Janice is going to introduce herself as well.
Yes. And I'm here on the digital side. I am the Digital Transformation and E-commerce Program Manager here at Temple University. PADTEP, as it's known, is a statewide program that provides e-commerce and digital communication strategies and help for all small businesses throughout the state of Pennsylvania. I come with a very diverse background in marketing, have been in this a long time, and I'm here to help you grow internationally. So our agenda today, Blondine's going to talk about why go international, what's important. We'll give an overview of international marketing, some tips for international web design, cybersecurity, and where to start. And lastly, we're going to give you lots of resources that are available through the U.S. Commercial Service, ustrade.gov, and other services available through you, through the federal government.
So the first question, maybe I don't know if we can ask in the chat the people who are already exporting or planning to export, but it's really why. And usually I start by the no. So next slide, please. So really, is it possible for you? And next slide. I like to start by, you should not export for those reasons. So you're not going to increase your margins. You're going to increase your volume, but the products you're going to sell overseas going to make less money for you because you have more, you will have to pay shipment and there are more fees, more costs for those sales. So keep that in mind. It will reduce your margins, but increase your volumes. it is time consuming. It's a big learning curve. That's why we're here, try to make it easier for you. But you know, it takes time of your strategy, and so takes time from you not selling more in the US. So you need to have that time. You need to be comfortable of losing controls, because you have more risks that are not, you cannot change. You know, like suddenly there is a shutdown, or there is a country that you know, their ports are not open for a strike. Like suddenly there are things you cannot control, or volcano and nothing can fly anymore. So being comfortable with that loss of control. And especially if you're still in the process of defining your value proposition, your competitive advantage, it may be difficult for you to export if you're not crystal clear on what you're selling. Sometimes you can sell in the US, experiment, you know, local markets, and because of your network you can sell, but it's harder to translate a value proposition that is not crystal clear to foreign markets. So I would say if you're not comfortable with that, you should not consider e-commerce yet. But you can still prepare your website for it. Next slide. I think we're missing one. No. So why you should export? First of all, the international e-commerce is really booming. Now there are so many tools, so many options that a small business, even a one-person business, can be in multiple international markets. I invite you to look at that source. We've really present, you know, the e-commerce growth, but it's expected in 2023 to have 6.5 trillion of sales on e-commerce. And so you don't need anymore to be a multinational to have access to international markets. Next slide. So that's you, Janice.
Okay, thank you. So how do I sell products abroad? The short answer is you have to get your products online, and that can be difficult. You have to already have a current website and be shipping from the US. Then you can sell your products on an international marketplace, and you can do it lots of different ways. You can have a separate site for each country. For example, Amazon, the behemoth in global marketing and e-commerce sells on 5 continents and has 20 country-specific websites. For example, if you wanted to look around, you would go to amazon.com/Canada, amazon.com/the EU/Ireland, and you can find the specific websites. When you're selling products abroad, you can ship internationally using a third-party service. That simplifies the process. However, again, as Blondine had just mentioned, you can lose control. You can drop ship internationally, which means that these products are already located overseas and drop ship from there. You can partner with an overseas company to stock and ship your products. This works well if you have a high margin product. Remember, if you're selling a t-shirt and you're only making $2 on a $20 t-shirt, selling abroad, you're going to lose money. So make sure that you want to sell a product or service that is going to increase your margins, make more money. You also have to support international payment methods, and those can be very different than what we're used to here in the US. You can support international currencies. How are you going to do that? How are you going to take the British pound and put it in US dollars, or the EU currency and put it in US dollars? Are you going to offer local customer service in that country or in that on that continent? And how are you going to localize your site? All questions you really need to have a handle on before you start the process. So there's some international e-commerce factors that you really need to consider. And Blondine, feel free to jump in here, as I know you can always add more to the conversation, but I'll start. Think about right now, when you're selling abroad, the political and economical ramifications in those countries or continents. Earlier this year, we saw a war erupt between Russia and Ukraine, and US companies caught basically in a crossfire, whether they can continue doing business in those countries. So being aware of what's going on and having that information is extremely important. Knowing the technical and legal ramifications, difficulties, and opportunities in selling internationally. The laws are different, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. The environmental and social and cultural cues. Here in the US, what we consider culturally and socially acceptable is not going to be acceptable in the Middle Eastern countries. So again, knowing your customers and your products. Blondine, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, two things about those two last dimensions. So environmental is not only about regulation about the environment, but also, if it freezes, when you the weather can be different, and the way the storage can be different. I remember I had a company who sold in Canada and forgot that your storage facility can freeze during the winter. So all their products that were liquid were destroyed during the first Canadian winter because they were from Europe, and it doesn't freeze that much. So keeping that the environment, but also the weather can be different, so that can influence your logistics, heavily. And about social and cultural, you remember when I mentioned you need a clear value proposition? That's very important, because then you can try to translate it. But if there are a lot of things that are complex references, complex taglines that refer to things very American, it won't translate well. So the simpler, the better. And then you have to check with professionals or people from those countries. That could be in Philadelphia. We have a lot of immigrants, to make sure that your taglines, your works, and that your product is also accepted, because certain products may just not sell in other countries. So those two dimensions is something that we forget. So legal, you're used to it. The rest you're kind of used to it, even for day-to-day US business, but those aspects are very important.
Yes, thank you. Let's go to the next one. So one way to help you develop that simple value proposition for targeting e-commerce internationally is find out who are your competitions. Do your market research. Here at Temple University, we can help you with some of those through working with your core consultants, but we always say review international websites. Find out what's going on in your desired industry. Are you a B2B? Are you selling to other businesses? Are you selling direct to consumers? Are you selling just to Canada and Mexico, that are, of course, the countries related to the United States? Or are you selling across an ocean? So look for those key trends and innovative ideas, and think about that in unique value. Lots of resources out there. The US government resources for international trade are remarkable. So trade.gov, the US Commerce Service, IBIS World, are just to name a few. And Blondine, I'll let you talk about virtual trade shows and matchmaking.
So due to the pandemic, the world have changed, and now we have more and more matchmaking events that can be virtual. So matchmaking event, it's usually you have a platform, you set up a profile, you present your offer into that profile. So it's kind of a virtual booth or a kind of a private LinkedIn page on a platform, and people can schedule meetings with you. And for a few days, you can have those one-on-one meetings. So that's what's called a matchmaking platform. Some trade shows already had that physically, so they implemented it virtually. Other, like the US Commercial Services, starting to experiment with those type of programs virtually. So from your office, from home, you can really like start exploring international matchmaking. And actually, we have a program in February on that, more for B2B. You have also things you may not think of. You have a lot of trade shows in the US that have already an international audience. So the Fancy Food Show in New York, you have a lot of international companies and governments and distributors. So you may want to look at local trade shows that have international audience, at trade shows that now have a part that is virtual, workshops, webinars that are virtual, and the best of the best is those virtual matchmaking where you can really start meeting people at very low cost or no cost at all. So that's what I wanted to share. The world is better for you now. You don't need to travel and spend thousands of dollars to just have a first initial feedback from a market.
So there are some key considerations when you're thinking of selling abroad. First, you need to determine the international traffic or where orders are originating from on your website. The easiest way to do that is Google Analytics. So if you currently have Google Analytics enabled on your website, you can check to see, are you getting any views from other countries? Or even within the US, where is your web traffic coming from? As we had already mentioned, you want to consider those cultural and language differences. We need to understand the economic and political policy of the country or that region. It can be very different in the US, and it's very different in other countries globally. Find out whether there are any tariffs on your products or trade barriers. Just because you can sell across states in the US without any additional taxes doesn't mean you won't have any tariffs if you're selling abroad. And there could be trade barriers. Again, the government agencies can help you to do that. And one of the most important considerations if you're selling in the European Union is understanding the GDPR and other security standards. We'll talk about that in a moment. So, international website design. So, how do you make an international website? Well, you need to pick your segmentation strategy first. You can do it similar to what Amazon does, the company name .fr for France, or their domain name within that country. You could do a subdomain and you can do a subfolder. All of that is how you're going to start developing your strategy so that people can find you globally. Then you're going to pick your language. Are you only going to sell in one region of the world where they speak French, or are you going to sell in regions where we can choose the language? You may have been on websites yourself where it asks for your language. Think about even filing your taxes here in the US. There's a program in there where you could choose different languages so that it's translated to help the consumer process that information. When you're translating, you want to make sure that you're using a reputable translating company or person. those small differences in cues and languages, even within a region. Think about how the English language differs, how there's spellings for different words in England versus in the US. Translation is going to be very important and help to drive the customers to your website. Are you going to redirect your visitors? So if you're coming in from the US to another country, you sometimes get redirected. Are you going to give your link options to your visitors? So how we can monitor that and give proper language versions of your website. And we have to think about the search engines globally. Well, Google is the #1 search engine in the US. Yahoo is the #1 search engine in India. So those subtle differences when you're doing your SEO optimization is going to be very important. And those key words on your websites to direct people to that you are an international seller are also going to be things that are going to require a lot of your time and focus. And lastly, but most importantly, international sites and e-commerce is going to be money, translation, and payment. So Blondine, I'd like to invite you back to talk a little bit about the different payment services and other considerations.
But that's very nice, Janice. I'm not an expert on the payment options, but I can definitely talk about that slide.
Okay.
I've seen some questions in the tax, and yes, now the new platforms that allow to do international e-commerce can integrate with different payment options. And you need to keep in mind the return policy, for example, in your payment, but how to give back money if needed. So this is all the different things we usually forget. So duty and taxes, Janice mentioned. Custom, we mentioned. There are some countries with free trade agreements, but also there are some subtlety on what free trade agreements mean. So it doesn't mean necessarily no tariffs. So this is important to know. And really understanding not only how they can pay you, how it can appear on their screen, like it's really harder for them if they see US dollars, but there are those platforms who can automatically translate into the local currency, but also setting up the delivery expectations, and it can be tricky to set up the fees for the shipment fees, because it can vary a lot. Sometimes to start with a flat fee, even if you may lose a little money, and sometimes makes a little money, let's say it's $25 or whatever, it may help at the beginning, or using directly service providers, platform like Amazon, and that they deal with you, they plan it for you, but it's pricey. So that's from that slide, all the different things to consider. I know it can be overwhelming, but there are tools, and Janice is gonna explain a bit more tools that can do it for you. Did you want me to talk about something else? And talk to your bank, because the bank can have fees on any foreign transactions that come in.
No, thank you. That's very important.
Okay.
I appreciate that. So what I'm going to jump in and talk about right now is cybersecurity. So this is very important internationally. And there's 4 key areas that you need to consider for e-commerce. That's your data security, your compliance and risk assessment, software security, and network security. Remember, when you're looking to sell internationally, you're opening yourself up to other compliance and risk issues. So protecting your data by law is going to be very important. And that can change based on each country that you're going to be working with. But what doesn't change is how you secure your website, how you secure the software and your network so that consumers feel safe in purchasing your products globally. Now, in a lot of the new platforms, so whether you're going to be using a WordPress platform, Shopify, Wix, there are ways to enable your website to sell internationally. We saw that in the chat where that will collect the proper tariffs and shipping cost and translate things for you. But again, when it comes down to the end of the day, you as the business owner is responsible. So we always encourage you, if you are going to venture off and sell globally, that you work with an accountant that is very astute about international commerce, that you also work with an attorney, and different offices in the federal government to assure that what you're doing is correct. The General Data Protection Regulation that we've referred to a couple of times earlier this session, the GDPR, it's a legal framework that was set up in 2018 by the European Union. And what this really does is it protects EU citizens and gives them more control over their personal data. The easiest way for me to explain this and the differences, here in the US, we have to opt out of data collection, except if you're in California, which has a very stringent law about that. If you're in the EU, you have the opportunity, you're already opted out, you would have to opt in so that retailers and social media can follow you. So it's really control access to data. It permits or prohibits, I should say, the cookies following you, so that in every organization, they process your personal data a little bit differently. So we have to think about these regulatory concerns when you're selling globally. In this slide deck, and you will receive it as Garba said, there's a lot of different resources and links. This is one of them. To talk about how GDPR would impact you from a marketing perspective. And a lot of that has to do with data collections, technology, and metrics. So when we think about how you currently collect that information from Google Analytics, it's going to look a little bit differently when you're selling products and services in the EU. So now what? Well, the first thing is, do you have that website and is it set up globally? If not, you're going to need to create a website. So at this point, I'd like to ask, if you want to drop in the chat for me, do you have a website and are you planning to sell globally? I'd love to hear from those in our audience today that hope to sell globally. Okay. Blondine, did you want to come back in or would you like me to continue?
Well, I'm here. Like I can come back on the resources.
Well, yes, let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead a couple of slides. Blondine has another event here shortly, but I wanted her to talk about the resources that is available to all of you, and I'll monitor the chat while you do that, Blondine.
Thank you so much. So I know it's overwhelmed, but there is also something, it is fun, and thinking internationally helps you also to be set up for success in the US. You know, as Janice mentioned, California for data, it's very similar actually to GDPR in Europe. And the whole world is moving toward like more data protection. So starting to think internationally and cybersecurity and all of that will help you also for success in the US. So don't get overwhelmed and don't put it aside. You know, keep thinking of it. So those are the resources that I think you can start with. The Trade Administration did a wonderful guide, and we have some hard copy at the office. It's called the Basic Guide to Exporting, and there is a whole section on e-commerce on that, and it's really where you can start, can be your Bible. And on the online version, you have all those links to videos and additional training. So I really recommend to look at that guide. And even prior to that, if you're still wondering, international or not, you can look at the assessment that the Trade Administration has set up for you. So this is on the federal website, and there are also information about trade finance. Sometimes people are wondering how to get paid. For e-commerce, unless you're selling, cars or, big products, if you sell t-shirts, you may not really overthink it, but there are different tools depending on the price of your product, how you can be paid. And the trade finance are good explanations of the different aspect of that. Next slide. So those are what's available here in Philadelphia. So you have an office of the U.S. Commercial Services here in Philadelphia. If your products or services actually are 51% American, you can definitely join the U.S. Commercial Services. They have some services at no cost. Other services like their trade winds and certain train missions, or even we'll see a bit later, their audits on the website, you have little fees associated. But on the state level, you see on the Pennsylvania level, you could apply for a called STEP grant or Global Access Program. GAP grant, it's the same. STEP is the national name, GAP is the Pennsylvania name. You can get up to $10,000 of reimbursement of expenses, and it can cover the U.S. commercial services, for example. So it covers 75% of your expenses for international trade. It can cover some of the e-commerce, but really associated with international e-commerce. So not website development, but adding multiple currency payment options, for example. So you will have to set up a proposal, and that it's clear the part that is for international e-commerce. They will validate it. Then you can pay your web developer, and then you will be reimbursed. So this can be a little tricky. Other services that the state of Pennsylvania has that is wonderful, from your taxes, they are paying international consultants overseas that are there to help you at no cost. So if you want to have an insight about the German market, even talk to potential clients or distributors, having them reviewing your website, they are at your disposal. And they come once or twice a year, depending, in person in Philadelphia. They were here in September at Temple Center City. It's coordinated by our local World Trade Center. So you have all those resources. So I did put the map. You see international trade representative map. You can see the countries the state is covering. It's the countries where there is the most trade and import and export. So it's a good map to say, okay, that's maybe where you should start, not a country where the state of Pennsylvania has less relationships. The DCD has also a website with resources, kind of similar as the US Commercial Services. So other videos, it's always helpful, other library of videos. So this is at your disposal. And the state is supporting organizations in Pennsylvania to help you coordinate those meetings with the international representative. So it's called, I know it's a lot of words, but Regional Export Network. So here in Philadelphia is a World Trade Center. So the World Trade Center can help you to apply to that grant. If you have questions, we are there. That's my job. I can also be that liaison. But you want to go internationally, you have SBDC, you have US Commercial Services, you have the state, you have the World Trade Center. We all work together, and so there's no wrong door to knock at. And there are a lot of different services, and we know each other very well. We talk to each other at least once a month, usually weekly. That all the services available to you, which is quite unique compared to other states. Next slide. So those are random websites I personally like to get information about statistics of import, export. Sometimes understanding imports can also help because it means over exchange on those products. So it's not only about export, but import can be interesting. Keep in mind, statistics are mostly about products. So services is much harder to find information because we cannot track it. And we are looking at some training to help if some of you have services you want to export. It's kind of a different strategy, but it's very interesting too. And in general, you will find more information about exporting, which is what you're trying to do. But about importing, there is way less information. So those are kind of websites I use often and resources that we mentioned earlier.
Great. Well, Blondine, thank you so much for joining us. I'll go ahead and wrap this up because I know you need to move forward. So Thank you again.
I know you're in good hands with Janice. But e-commerce can be fun and it's a good journey for you as an entrepreneur. So don't get overwhelmed, one step at a time, and there are a lot of resources available to you. So thank you so much. And yes, I'm going to join my other meetings, but thank you, Janice, for the invitation.
Thank you. Well, everyone, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up over the next few moments, but I did want to talk about some additional resources that are available. Again, it's our taxpayers' dollars, and this is on the federal level. If you aren't familiar with the U.S. Commercial Service, I really suggest that you go to their website and really look at what they do and the services they provide. My favorite service that they provide is Website Globalization Review, which is a gap analysis. So for a very small fee, they will look at your website to make sure that they're compliant internationally. They look at the aesthetics. They look at your website and compare them to international best practices. They looked at your SEO web crawls. So they really look at your SEO analyses and compare them again to best practices. They run a report similar to what we would do here at Temple University, but with, again, based on those recommendations and requirements in the countries in which you hope to sell. And they do e-commerce business service provide or referrals. So, and all of this is based on the size of your company. A small company is typically usually under 100 employees, and I would expect that would be all of us on the webinar today. So for $100, they will review your website against everything that is required globally. So that is extremely valuable service. As Blondine had shown you, the U.S. Commercial Service has an office in Philadelphia, but you can work with them virtually from anywhere. Where can you find their resources? On their website. If you look down on the left-hand side, it will be Explore eCommerce resources. They have lots of information. Oops, sorry about that. Lots of information available to you. Just checking the chat here. So as I wrap things up, one of the most important websites is trade.gov/ecommerce. Again, this will help you to look at things differently than it does here in the US. Just want to talk about Temple University Small Business Development Center. You're all very familiar with us that are on this webinar today, but we're here to help you. So whether it's for small business consulting, so you're just starting out and you need your business plan, legal formation, you need marketing and marketing research, or you need something more specific, such as e-commerce, you would work with members of myself and my wonderful team. We provide training, webinars, resource sharing, and clinics, similar to what you've just been through today. Right now, I'm going to turn it off to Garba to talk about the survey, and then I'll come back and answer any questions that you may have.
Janice, thank you very much. Quick one, this goes to our wonderful attendees. Remember, we at Temple SPDC, we always cherish your feedbacks. A few minutes ago, I just posted a 30-second survey about today's webinar. I think I will just go ahead and post it for the second time. For those of you that didn't see it the first time, I just posted it again. We at Temple SPDC, like I said earlier on, we cherish your feedbacks, even as it helps us in improving the services we provide to you guys at a no cost. So please kindly take 30 seconds of your time to help us out, fill out the survey link. Janice, I think we can continue.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions, but if you do have one, drop it into the chat right now. And we'll stay in the webinar for a couple more minutes. But we do really appreciate your time today. As an entrepreneur, you should be very proud of yourself for considering selling globally. And there's so many different resources available to you. And look to the state and federal governments for assistance as well. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions. You can connect with us or sign up for our newsletter by scanning this QR code and reach out. You can find Blondine or I simply by emailing the sbdc@temple.edu, and we'll connect that way. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, to wrap it up, just as in addition to what Janice actually said, I just want to use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you guys for keeping it a day with us. Janice, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Also to my wonderful Temple SPDC colleague, thank you for your usual cooperation and support. Without them, we wouldn't have been here, and webinar wouldn't have even come into existence. Without further ado, with the absence of any other question on board, I guess we'll just wrap it up. Thank you guys, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.